Hi everyone, this is Johari Shuck with Your Black Education, and we have gathered a coalition, or really an army of folks that are really passionate about educating our kids. At this point in time, educating our children is one of the most important responsibilities that we have, and so we want to gather a group of people who have expertise in different areas to help make sure that our children are being educated the way that they need to be inside and outside of the schools. So today we have as our guest Mr. Jamal Bowman, and he's the principal of the Cornerstone Academy for Social Action based out of the Bronx, New York. So today I'm excited to talk to him about not just his expertise, but also how he got to education. And our big focus is going to be on testing, high stakes testing. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So enough of me talking. Good morning, Jamal. How are
Good
you?
morning. Good morning. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm good. I'm good. So I just want to get right into it. And number one, tell our viewers what it is that you do at CASA, your role. And
Mm.
then I want to back up and talk about how you progress through the educational career. So go ahead and take it.
So I'm incredibly blessed to be the founding principal of Cornerstone Academy. I actually founded the school in 2008, 2009. I've been here now. This is my seventh year as principal. And my role really is to sort of set the mission and vision of the school, help frame the education philosophy with my teaching staff, students, and parents, and also and simply coach and support teachers in their pedagogy, in their curriculum, in their assessments, and how they interact with kids and how they interact with parents, and also to connect with the extended community. Because we have a lot of community relationships and community organizations that come in and support what we do here. So that's my role here as principal.
Okay, okay. Now we've talked before this interview, and I know that you've had a really interesting path in the educational field. So can you tell us about how you got into education, a little bit about your background, and then how you got into the field?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in New York City. I lived in East Harlem in the projects up until I was age 7 or 8. Then I moved to the Upper East Side, moving on up like the Jeffersons. And thankfully, rent control apartments allowed my mother to afford the rent in the place where we live. So I was able to see the contrast between working class families and middle class families versus low income families and the struggles that happened there when I was growing up. I was a street kid, very mischievous. Would play a lot, get into a lot of trouble. Had my share of run-ins with law enforcement and school officials and things like that. So I was definitely not the perfect student, not the straight A student. Part of the reason is because the school curriculum didn't connect with me. I didn't learn much about my history and my culture and my upbringing, and it was just kind of drill and kill and very, very boring. So, I acted out like a lot of young men of color act out. Luckily for me, when I was in about 10th or 11th grade, I had the opportunity to move to New Jersey and finish school. My dad lived in New Jersey, so I moved to Jersey and finished school out there in a much more subtle environment where things were calm. I got to play football and experience other extracurriculars that the city didn't provide at that time. After high school graduation, I went to school at the University of New Haven and I studied business management. Graduated within 4 years and came out without many job prospects. And a friend of mine told me maybe look at education as a possibility, of becoming a teacher. So I did that, and as soon as I walked in, I knew it was exactly where I needed to be. I started teaching in District 9 in the Bronx, which is one of the poorest districts in the country. Started teaching there. I taught there for 5 years, loved every minute of it. And then worked at the high school for 3 years as a dean of students, counselor, teacher, different things like that. And then I joined New Leaders for New Schools to train to become a principal for a year while doing an internship at Achievement First Endeavor Charter School. And while I was there, I wrote the proposal for CASA, and CASA opened in 2009.
Okay, okay, that is really cool. So, what prompted you to, well, first of all, how did the thought come into your head to write a proposal to open up a school? That's not like your typical thought that people just normally think about.
Well, first and foremost, when you become a teacher, you have to be a consummate learner. So when I became a teacher in 1999 and started my graduate work in guidance counseling, I just learned a lot about social emotional intelligence, the psychology of our kids growing up, about pedagogy, about assessment, about different educational theories and philosophies. And as I learned and I compared it to my experience as a teacher, I saw there was just a contrast. There was just not a lot of the theory being applied in the schools. So I always had an idea if I opened my own school what it would look like, and I would write about it and I would journal about it. And it just got to a point where I was tired of being one. I wanted to make a larger impact for more kids because I was very frustrated by the kids in high. I thought when I worked in elementary school that they would kind of outgrow some of their behaviors and inefficiencies by high school. But when I got to high school, I saw that they didn't outgrow it unless someone intervened. So I was very frustrated by that. I wanted to make a bigger change. And also, I was tired of teachers sort of constantly complaining about the principal, complaining about the kids, complaining about the system. Just a lot of complaining as to what was happening. I'm like, look, I'm not just going to sit here and complain. I'm going to do something about it. So let me pursue, becoming the principal and write a proposal for a school.
And that's really important because you're talking about complaining, okay? And we know that morale has everything to do with how you do your job. So that effect kind of trickles down to the kids, and you being who you were saw that that implication on the children, I'm sure. So it's good that
Yeah.
you talked about that. Now, did you like consult with people, or like what was your how did once you had that idea to do that, how did you move forward?
Well, I've always been a social guy and I've always networked and I love having deep conversations with people just about the world around us, especially as a black male. I mean, you're always talking about like the issues in the black community and why police brutality continues and why our kids aren't performing at high levels and why all the new entrepreneurs and the new technology don't come from our community. So you constantly have those conversations, and as you have those conversations and you look to learn more just about the world around you, you meet different people. So I would just talk to people and hear their story, and I love just vibing with different people from different backgrounds and learning from them, and they would learn from me. And so it was kind of an organic thing. I also had a friend who had gone through new leaders maybe 6 years prior, and I knew how just solid and awesome she was. So I'm like, okay, if they could, support her awesomeness, maybe they could support mine. So that's kind of how it happened.
Okay, okay. So now let's kind of move into once you actually started the school, you have to staff it, you have to develop your curriculum and all these things. And you talked earlier about how you learned a lot of theory that was not, put into practice. And so that was, on the forefront of your agenda when you were opening up your school. So what are some of the things that you incorporated in CASA that were theoretically based that you knew that you needed to apply in order to achieve success for the children that you're serving?
Yeah, so Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences is one. I knew that intelligence was diverse and didn't only include reading, writing, and math. I knew that science needed to be a core of our curriculum, particularly in the 21st century when everything now is about STEM and STEAM. So I wanted to have a huge STEM and STEAM focus, STEAM being science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So I wanted us to have a huge STEAM focus and students work on projects around that. They still got the independent reading and the literature and the deep exploration and Socratic seminar going on in their ELA classrooms, and they still got the math component as well. But I try to tailor what we did towards interdisciplinary project-based, performance-based assessments. And I know we're going to get into high stakes testing and the way it works, but I just felt it was better for us at the school level to have a project-based, performance-based, interdisciplinary assessment policy in place so kids got to perform and express their multiple intelligences, whether it was based on technology, based on visual spatial, based on linguistics, based on creativity, based on collaboration, based on the needs of the 21st century, but also aligned to their passions and interests as well. So our kids, even though we're a public school and you hear about public schools don't have the funds and they're cutting art and they're cutting this and they're cutting that, we have art, we have gardening, we have dance, we've had chess, we have music production, we have basketball, we have flag football, we have track. And we have the core subjects as well. And if you go on YouTube and look up Casa Middle School or Cornerstone Academy Middle School, you'll see like videos our kids have produced and written songs and all that. So we just try to educate the whole child because we believe social intelligence is as important as emotional intelligence and mental intelligence as well.
And it's funny that you mentioned the video because I have looked at a couple of myself, and I was just really impressed because you can see how the school is really based on affirming these children who they are, their culture, and like you said, their talents, their gifts, and all of those things. And so that's evident from the videos that I watch. So it's funny that you mentioned that.
Thank
So now, when you because you're a public school, I didn't realize that, and I think that's interesting because
Yeah, we're not a charter school.
okay, okay,
Yeah, I want to make that distinction because often when we talk about who we are and what we do, people automatically ask or say, "Are you a charter?"
hmm
And that's because charter has taken over the narrative publicly of what a good school is.
hmm
And you don't have to be a charter school to be a good school. We're not a charter. We've never been a charter. I'm personally against charter because I'm pro union and I believe teachers should have a union and workers should be union based. That's one reason why I'm against it. But we're a public school, yes.
okay. And I didn't realize that when people create their own schools, develop them, that they can be a public school.
Yeah.
How do you like? How did I mean? Is it in the application process that differentiation is made, or how did you, end up that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, every city is different, and every state,
hmm
has their own policies around that. For me, at that time, we had Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who gets a lot of criticism for a lot of his policies. But one that, if it wasn't for him, I don't know if I would have the opportunity to open up a district school. So he opened the door for any educator or any person who was passionate about public education who wanted to explore opening a school. He opened the door and put systems in place to support people like me who wanted to open public schools. So it was a policy that was in place at the time with that particular administration. That's something that's not in place now in New York as much as it used to be. I know in other states it's a little more prevalent, but what you see now is if you want to open up a new school, usually people take the charter route based on the current climate because from the federal government all the way down, they're supporting charters and they're supporting the opening of charters.
Yeah,
So that's usually the way people go at this time to open up schools.
yeah. They're kind of pushing charter down our throats, aren't
Exactly.
they? So now because you're a public school, and I'm getting ready to transition now into the whole idea of high stakes testing, because in my mind, and I'm in higher education, so my knowledge of the K through 12 is growing. Okay, and so I didn't realize that you have so much flexibility when it comes to your curriculum and how you teach your students in a public school. Like I thought that only charter schools had that freedom, and obviously not. So how do you, because high stakes testing is such a tight, link to these public schools, how are you able to do the things that you deem important for your students that might not be in alignment with what other public schools are doing?
Yeah, we just try to be innovative and creative in our approach. So as I mentioned before, our students still get 500 minutes of humanities a week, for example. They still get 350 minutes of science, 300 minutes of math. They still get interventions that are in place to support them academically more in alignment with the state tests. But I refuse to just do more of that and less of the other stuff that are going to develop our kids holistically. Because we know that studies show standardized test scores do not equal college and career success. I mean, you and I talked before about that 2003 KIPP class, first KIPP school. They were fifth in New York City in math scores, but 6 years after entering college, only 21% had their college degree. So we know that standardized tests alone, especially how they're currently constructed, do not equal college success. What equals college success based on the research and my experience is an emotional attachment to the curriculum. And that only comes from students being driven by purpose, and that purpose only comes from them having a voice and choice in the curriculum.
Yeah.
So if teachers and schools align what they do to the passions of students and the needs of their community, they're more likely to be self-driven to do well in college and careers. If schools and teachers don't do that, you're going to continue to see low college graduation rates. And it's not just black and brown kids who aren't graduating from college. White kids don't graduate from college at high rates as well. It's just low across the board because they haven't found their passions. It's not necessarily that they're academically deficient, although some are. It's also because they haven't found their passion. They haven't found what they're going to pursue for their career. So we've just always tried to, even in the climate of high stakes testing, we've tried to provide a holistic education and educate the whole child.
And you just touched on something that I hadn't thought about before, but you were saying how, talking about KIPP and how, I think that a lot of our children, black and brown kids, are being, put into these charter schools because of these illusions of what they are. But they seem to be based on models that are based on Eurocentric values and Eurocentric realities. So for kids that are not black and brown, yeah, I'm sure that testing might indicate something because they have other things that balance that and they have different motivations. And for our kids, like you said, we're motivated by a different set of things. And so that's what's important to understand. There's cultural differences among our children. And the only way to, rectify these huge gaps is to address that part. And that's why these kids aren't graduating because they're not getting, that nurturing of the other stuff, which is exactly what you said. And I'm glad you
Exactly.
raised that point.
Generally speaking, the Eurocentric curriculum is rooted and polarized in the left brain, so to speak, right? So segregated faculties, faculties that deal with classification and categorization, language faculties, that's polarization in the left brain. That's generally how that works. Afrocentric or Eastern philosophy, if you will, is more right brain and whole brain curriculum and pedagogy. And in our schools, we don't really see that. We see a lot of ranking and filing. We see a lot of multiple choice. We see a lot of one right answer. And that's what standardized testing is aligned to. And we don't see the multiple answers, the divergent thinking, the critical problem solving and creative problem solving that other cultures experience as well. And it's cross cultural, right? So when you take a whole brain and holistic approach to educating all children benefit. So it's not like we need to teach black kids one way and white kids another. We need to teach all of them in a holistic way. And the more we do that, the more productive. I mean, look at our economy, right? So our economy is struggling. The wage gap is tremendous. We incarcerate more people than any other country in the world. Depression rates are high. We have so many issues in our economy, and we continue to do more of the same to address those issues. We need an entirely different approach, and I think it starts with holistic education and multiple intelligences.
Yeah, it definitely does. So now going to the issue of the test. Now, since you're a public school, you do have to administer certain tests, or what is the policy around public schooling and these high stake tests?
Yeah, we have to administer the test, yes. But what a message I want to send to parents is they don't have to take the test. Parents have a right to opt out of the test. They have a right to refuse the test if they feel the tests aren't measuring the holistic intelligence of their children, or if they feel they want something different, like a portfolio assessment or something of that nature. So we, as educators, we have to administer the test, but parents have a right to refuse the test.
Now, do you tell the parents of your kids at CASA that same thing?
Yeah, we tell them what their rights are. And what I try to do is I try to open up a bigger conversation about education and teaching and learning in general, just so we can begin to rethink and reimagine and hopefully restructure what education looks like in our communities. In other communities, they have open space education, they have Montessori education, they learn through exploration, they learn through creativity, it's very collaborative, it's very different. And in other schools, private schools, progressive public schools, there's no high stakes standardized testing the way it's done in public schools. But for us, because of the testing, Now that impacts our curriculum, that impacts how we teach, and we're only focused on mostly, reading, writing, and math from grades 3 all the way through grade 8. And not saying those things aren't important, but we need the other side of it as well, because the kids who graduate from those schools, they go on to be CEOs and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and those people like that, while we go on to hopefully work for them or struggle to get a city job where in the next 20, 30 years there might be robots or computers doing some of those jobs that we've had in the past. So we need to think innovatively and creatively about what our schools could be for our kids and align it to human potential and authentic and innate human curiosity. I mean, when you watch a newborn baby that's born, as they grow and develop, they're naturally curious, they're naturally happy, they're naturally joyful to explore and see what's over here. And if we created schools that were aligned to an environment like that, imagine how much our kids will excel.
You're right. You're right. Now, since you do the testing, I know that you and I talked about um, the success that CASA students have had with these standardized tests. So I want you to talk about that just for a minute. But what are the standardized tests that you have to administer in either in the city or in the state? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, so they're the New York State administered tests. They're generally aligned to the Common Core standards. I say generally because the standards are very flexible, where teachers, if they get an opportunity, can be creative around curriculum aligned to the standards. But the state administers the assessment, and they're supposed to be aligned to the Common Core standards. And for us, I mean, we do well. I mean, over the last, this is my 7th year in the school. We generally get kids who are 2 to 3 grade levels behind. About two thirds to 3/4 of our kids are 2 to 3 grade levels behind. And on the most recent standardized test that we took, we had the highest combined average growth score in New York City, which is phenomenal. We grew 9.8 points in math and 14.2 points in ELA, which combined average is the highest in the city. And in 2012, we were ranked in the top 17% of all middle schools in New York City based on our test scores. And ever since, New York's been doing this report card grades and different things like that. We've never gotten less than a B. I guess what I'm most proud of is our special needs population, because my philosophy is we don't isolate any kids, right? So sometimes you'll see self-contained special ed classes, and we don't really do it that way. Our special needs students are included with the rest of the population most of the time, and they're pulled out when they need small group instruction in a particular area, just like other kids who need strong small group instruction in a particular area. So we view all students as genius and all students as special, and we try to create an environment that meets the needs of everyone. So, and using that approach, our special needs students year in and year out continue to make excellent growth results on the standardized tests, even though we're not even measuring based on that. Like, we're not a test prep school at all.
Now, I think it was important, backing up to something that you said earlier about you are giving your parents their rights. You're letting them know what their rights are. And I would imagine that doesn't happen very often in these settings. So I think that that's important, because if you're not informed, then you're not empowered. And that's one of the biggest issues, I think, in our community when it comes to education is that none of us are empowered, or we don't feel empowered. So our kids are not empowered. The parents don't feel empowered. And that's just a recipe for, a difficult time.
Yeah, I want to jump on that point you just made regarding parents not feeling empowered and not knowing their rights. I mean, all we got to do is look at the black experience in America. I mean, from slavery to Jim Crow to redlining to crack cocaine to police brutality and now to high stakes testing. I mean, we constantly have the government and others doing things to us as opposed to with us. And many of those things have been oppressive and destructive to our communities, mass incarceration being another one. So we're overwhelmed, And in many ways, we're downtrodden. I mean, we're working multiple jobs, we have multiple kids, we're not as strong in our community in terms of our relationships with each other. So we're vulnerable right now. And if we don't come together and figure out how to strengthen ourselves through information and through empowerment through information and letting parents know their rights and having these conversations, then we'll continue to be vulnerable, and we'll continue to have, as Ta-Nehisi Coates mentions, the boot on our neck. Only through empowering each other and ourselves are we going to overcome these centuries of oppression that have been taking place in America.
You're right. Now, I think that kind of touching on that point, I remember, I don't know, a couple years ago, maybe a year, I remember reading about, I think it was in Seattle or somewhere on the West Coast, where a group of parents got together and refused to take the test as a collective.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't parents in our community. And so I think that news like that is also important to share with parents because they can, if they don't feel empowered alone, then they should definitely feel empowered by a group of people. Do you try to convey that message at all in your work?
Yeah. So New York is almost the epicenter of the opt-out movement. Last year in 2014, there were 80,000 parents statewide that opted out of the exam. This year, there were 220,000
Wow.
opt-outs of the state exam. So it's been growing exponentially. But as you mentioned, it's not happening as much in our communities. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing this interview. That's one of the reasons why I'm speaking to as many parents as possible, speaking at community meetings, just engaging parents around this conversation. But let me just be clear, it's not just about the opt out, it's about the what's next. We're opting out as a form of civil disobedience, resisting something that's not healthy or helpful to our students long term, but we want to opt into and have a conversation around a better education system for our children. And what does that look like, right? How do we support families from the prenatal stage all the way through high school into college? How do we better use our resources and better allocate our resources so parents have nursery schools in their communities, qualified professionals that will lead them into kindergarten, pre-K, and into elementary school so they can have more success. So we're having the wrong conversations. Where, as a country, we're investing billions in standardized testing. We've been doing it for 15 years, and the achievement gap has grown. It hasn't closed. It's grown. So we're spending billions on something that isn't working. We need to rethink what we do in our communities.
You're right, and I that just made me think about the article that I shared with you earlier this week about how these tests are linked to the people that create the books.
Yeah,
I was floored to read that.
it's a scam.
Did you even
It's
know
a
that that was
scam, and the
happening?
government falls for it.
Oh
Like,
my
you're the
god!
governor. Pearson comes to you. They say, "Okay, we got these tests for you, right?" And the governor say, "Okay, that's good." And Pearson says, "Okay, we got these books that go with the test." And the governor says, "Cool." And then the governor mandates that school districts buy the books and then ties testing to teacher evaluation and principal evaluation. It's a scam, and these same companies invest in politicians' purse towards reelection. It's a scam. And same thing with the charter schools. You got Wall Street and you got these investors investing in charter schools, investing in politicians' purse for reelection, treating our kids like it's modern day slavery and these draconian methods, have them sit and urinating on themselves as they take practice tests. It's crazy out here, and we think and we allow it because the rhetoric is high test scores is the bottom line. So as long as high test scores mean your kids are learning, and that's not what they mean. They mean all it means is your kids have done well on those tests. That's it.
Yeah.
Doesn't look at well-rounded education. Doesn't look at the multiple intelligences. Doesn't look at performance-based assessment. Doesn't look at project-based assessment. Doesn't look at all the things kids will need when they go into college and get out of college to be
Exactly.
leaders in our economy, not just workers but leaders. It's unbelievable. Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay because you were saying what I was going to say, but you said it a little bit better than I did, so it's fine. But no, and I think that that's important because even for me, like I'm, a decently educated person, and I have children, and I have never tried to enforce my rights to these tests because I took tests when I grew up, so I'm just thinking that it's just a part of the way things go.
You
And
didn't take the same test though. You
that's
took
true.
different tests. You
That's
didn't take
true.
tests from third grade through eighth grade
You're right.
9 hours at a time.
You're
So
right.
third graders, 8-year-olds are sitting for 9 hours of testing, right? So they're sitting for 4.5 hours in math, 4.5 hours in ELA as an 8-year-old. 9 hours of testing, and it's every year. Why do we have to test every year? Especially when studies show third grade test scores are predictive of eighth grade test scores. So if the state wants to keep, the test, let's do it differently.
Yeah.
Let's test in the fourth grade. Let's test in seventh grade. Let's make it one day, 90 minutes, instead of making it 9 hours. You get your data, and then the state can make decisions to help schools and school districts based on doing it that way. It doesn't have to be done every year. It's so oppressive.
It
And now
is.
that we have teacher evaluations tied to it, it's tied in the hands of the teacher. So now the teacher can be as creative and innovative as they would like to be. So it's really something. I think I really encourage parents to learn their rights and exercise their rights, to refuse the test, but not just that, demand to have conversations about what else is out there, what are the other options, what is Riverdale Country School doing, and other private institutions doing with their kids. Why are they doing that? Why can't we do that with our kids?
Now,
Right? Have those conversations.
when a parent opts out, are does the school then have to say, okay, they're opting out, so this is the plan, this is the other plan, this is the alternate? The schools have to do that, or do the parents
Yes.
have to? How does
Yeah.
that?
The parent comes with a letter and says, "I will." The letter says, "I would like my child to opt out of the state test. I refuse to take the state test, and I request an alternate assessment."
Okay.
And the school has to come up with what that alternate assessment is. Now, the city has things in place that are kind of like an alternate assessment, but they're kind of just like the state test.
Mm.
But here at CASA, we have our own in-house assessments through writing benchmarks is one assessment we use. We have a technology program that assesses reading and math levels in the beginning, middle, and end of the school year, so parents can see their child's growth on this tool. And we do project-based and performance-based assessments throughout the year where students work on projects and present in front of their classmates and other adults. So we do that in-house, and we have consistent communication with parents around that so they can clearly see their child's growth from September to June.
Okay.
So parents come with the letter, request an alternate, and thankfully for us here at CASA, we have what that alternate is.
Okay. Now, I wanted to also ask you, and this is kind of from my own personal curiosity,
Yeah.
because I know that when my daughter was, I don't know, maybe fourth or fifth grade, she's not a good test taker, and so they. I remember getting a letter, and they said that because she had scored a certain amount on this test, they were putting her into like title, is it 10 or some special classification that schools provide when kids need to be remediated for certain things, and I forget what pool it
504.
was.
It might. I think it might change depending upon the state.
Okay,
With New York, it's 504 accommodations. It's not special education, but it's just accommodations that students receive when it comes to testing.
okay,
There's also something called RTI, which is response to intervention, which just basically means your child needs additional intervention and supports, something
hmm.
like that.
Now does that, and so okay, so that clarifies it a little bit. So then I didn't let my child participate in that because I didn't feel that she needed that. The
Hmm.
because she
Good for
didn't,
you.
yeah, because she didn't take, do well on this test. But my thing is, and this is my question: do they use that as a tracking mechanism or something, like these kids that are getting this special instruction because they're not doing well on these tests? Does that have other implications for the kid? I'm just curious. Do you know?
They might track it at the school level.
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, something like that isn't tracked at the state level, but there are other things that are tracked at the state level. There's been research done around fourth grade test scores and prisons that are being built, right? So the state gathers this data and people see the data and like, okay, we have X number of students in X area performing way below grade level. We know we're gonna need some prisons for that. So at the state level, that sort of thing is in place. Now it may not be explicit and it may not be policy, but the data is public. And if you're in the business of building prisons, like I think in Hillary Clinton's campaign, she was under some scrutiny because some lobbyists for private prisons also donate to her campaign, right? So there's just it's very dicey when we're talking about big data and the states collecting data and what's done with that data, and we know what they say, but we don't actually know what's done behind the scenes.
Right.
So at the school level, that tracking might be done, but speaking from my perspective, it would be done to more support the students' needs, as opposed to at the state level, which only support they really provide is usually funding, which is not all. The state still owes the city about $2 billion, but yeah, the state level is a different conversation.
I am so glad you brought that point up about the fourth grade testing and the building of the prisons, because I had heard that before and I haven't read anything about it, but that reminds me that I need to go back and read more about that, because that seems like another reason why we should be opting out. We should not be just giving these people this whack data and have them building all these prisons that they're trying to get our babies into.
Yeah, it contributes to the school to prison pipeline. So one part of the school to prison pipeline is overly suspending our students, right? Our kids get suspended disproportionately more than other kids, right? And it starts in pre-K. So that the way we treat them in the schools and constant suspensions and constant punitive measures, combined with high stakes testing, in which they continue to perform not as well as others, leads to high dropouts, leads to underemployment and low employment, leads to poor decision making outside of school. And let me go back to something I said earlier. This stuff begins at conception. So I'm a big advocate for how do we support families at the very beginning of them starting a family, whether it's a single mom or low income parents or under educated parents or whatever you want to call it. How do we support them? Because brain development begins in the womb. And the first year of life, the brain develops rapidly. In the first 5 years, you have 90% of the brain's development. So when we talk about the language gap and we talk about the executive function gap, which contributes to low skill school performance and health concerns in the future, we have to begin to intervene at that level, at the prenatal conception level. Schools need to work with physicians to come up with plans to make sure that the at-risk families, and at-risk doesn't only mean health concern, it doesn't only mean diagnosed for some type of mental illness. At risk means, we don't make as much money as we would like to, or we didn't finish our education like we wanted to, but we got this baby coming and we need some supports. We need to provide those supports at that level. And the more we do that, the less likely they are to perform poorly in school, whether we change the test or not.
And going along with that, we also need to educate our parents that might not have been engaged as students, because I think that happens too. Kind of this mentality towards education gets passed down from parents to their kids to their kids. And so, like, if you have a parent who they weren't engaged in school, their teachers disrespected them or didn't pay attention to them or whatever, why would that parent naturally say that, you should pay attention to education and make it a priority because they've had negative experiences? I think that also is part of the problem. So how do you think that we can combat that? Because that seems like the other side to what you're talking about is offering these interventions, but the other piece is educating parents and young people or whoever having babies that they need to have this knowledge about the effects of all of these things, like from the beginning. How do you do that?
Yeah, what we're trying to do this year is just partner with community-based organizations that work directly with parents. They do a lot of great work in the community on their own, but we figure it's a win-win to bring them into schools and work directly with our parents. So the Alliance for Quality Education is one organization that we work with that is going to help us bridge that gap between community needs, parent needs, and the resources that are out there through parent workshops, through parent trainings, and through parent support groups. The South Bronx Churches is another organization we're working with, where it's secular and non-secular organizations collaborating to again inform parents and empower parents on their rights and get them organized so they can advocate for themselves. We're also looking to partner with medical centers as well, because as I said, you have physicians who support families, and you have teachers who support families, and there needs to be a way for those two constituencies to work together to provide the supports. And our model of community schools, and we consider ourselves to be a community school, is something that we think needs to happen, particularly in our communities all over the country. Schools need to partner with medical centers and partner with children's services as well to provide proactive supports to families, not just reactive. Because what you see, take children's services for example, if a child comes in with a bruise, it's my job to question the child to see if their parent hit them, and I have to call that in to children's services, and then children's services will come and investigate. And part of their intervention might be parenting classes. Why can't they do those parenting classes on the front end when an expected mom is about
Right.
to have a child, and do it with expectant moms in a geographical region so they can begin to have parenting classes before the child is even born, and make this standard. Don't just do it for the high risk. Do it for everyone, because in my opinion, all people of color in America are high risk, as we can see by the constant
Right.
murdering of our people by police. That's
Hmm.
just one example of it.
Right. And that goes irrespective of education, your income, all of these things affect us as a community. We see that every day.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you brought up the whole idea of community schools, because I think that needs to gain a little bit more momentum. I think that we should be pushing community schools rather than charter schools. That's what they should be shoving down our throats. And
Absolutely.
and that's really like, people are trying to suggest that this community school idea is kind of like a novel idea, but it's not, because the black schools were doing these type of models back in the 20s, in the 1920s, because that's what we had to do, because we weren't allowed to go to certain doctors, or
That's right.
so we had to bring those things in house. So what you're talking about in the community school model, it's really a throwback to what we were already doing, which
Mm.
produced great people that came out that became our leaders. So I'm glad that you talked about that. That's really
Uh,
important. So as we wrap up, I know that there's so much more to talk about when it comes to these high stake tests, but I wanted you to kind of give some final thoughts on the testing, the implication that these tests have on our kids. I want parents to really understand that, so that they know what happens to their babies when they're forced to take these tests. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'll give you an example. So, in many schools, and I know we've talked about this before, and you probably heard before, the curriculum is incredibly narrowed, and it's a disproportionate focus on, let's say a child's schedule will have English language arts, writing, independent reading, social studies, math, science, and very little time for the creative endeavors, or very little time for the holistic multiple intelligence endeavors that we talked about. So, number one, they're not being holistically developed throughout their school day or throughout their school careers or a particular school year. Number two, when a child takes a test, and let's say they're a bad test taker, or they struggled for whatever reason, and they get a level, the test is scored on levels 1 through 4. Let's say they get a level 1.75. And now you have a child who might be a brilliant artist, who might be a brilliant dancer or musician or something else, scoring a level 1.75 in ELA, and now as a parent you see that score, and as a child you see that score, and now your sense of self worth and your level of self-esteem is incredibly crippled by that. Let me also say that public schools have to do better overall. It's not like, before charters we were doing great. There were some struggles.
Right.
So we need to be honest with ourselves and reflect on how we did and what we did wrong so that we can improve those things, because in all reality, our children shouldn't be getting level ones on state tests. But as I said before, we got to provide the right interventions as a society earlier on. And once we do that with all kids, they won't have level ones. But despite the lack of intervention, our kids still come with brilliance. They're still gifted. We just don't have a school curriculum that is aligned or flexible enough to tap into the brilliance of children. So the implication of focusing on high stakes testing in the way that we do it now, and let me just say, I'm not anti-testing, I'm not anti-accountability, which is a word they throw around. I'm pro-accountability. It just has to look differently, and it needs to tap into the innate brilliance of our children, and that needs to be a major part of the curriculum. So if we keep doing testing this way, we're doing less of that, and we're doing less of aligning what our kids need to the needs of the economy. This is a 21st century world. It's rapidly changing. Our kids need to be adaptive. They need to be creative. They need to take initiative. They need to have creative skills. They need to have a lot of things that these tests don't measure. So if we get rid of the tests or we alter them, now we can better align our curriculum to what our kids need to be successful in the current economy.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned all of those things. And I think that also, to piggyback on what you just said, we need to be more aware of how to get our children from point A to point B. Because I think that, generally speaking, kids or parents want their children to lead lives better than the lives that they led.
Hmm.
And so, in order to do that, a lot of us say we want our kids to go to college. We want our kids to get a college degree. Well, number one, even though I'm in higher ed, that's not the end all be all. Okay. But I think that parents need to understand what that whole path will look like for their kids from beginning to end, so that they know what they have to do to get that kid to that goal that they say that they want for their kids. So the
Yeah,
education piece is really key. Did you want to add on to that?
yeah. I mean, the testing, the way it's done now, sort of drives a wedge between parents and the school. The parents and the school need to work more cohesively and in a more integrated fashion toward meeting the needs of the children. Parents, they work a lot, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed out. There's a lot going on in the lives of parents, and even parents who are on public assistance. There's a certain stress level and behaviors that go along with that keep them away from engaging with the school. The school's work needs to be engaging with the parents, bringing them in as much as possible, so we can have these prenatal through career conversations. And it's going to take a lot for the schools to do that. And it would be better if the states, instead of this testing, would help facilitate more of that. Whether it's getting buses for parents to go to different events, different workshops, and engage with different organizations a different way. Whether it's the state providing some child care for parents who have young children and would love to go to a workshop but can't attend. Maybe it's the states providing some funding to help provide more cultural experiences for families and children as well, as opposed to what we're doing now. We're testing and punishing, and that's all we're doing. There's no, it's not. We're not taking a human approach to community, to teaching and learning. There's no joy in what's happening now in school, and learning and living should be about joy and health and passion, and that's totally gone from our schools, and we need each other to bring that back.
That was a good point to end on. I thank you so much for your time today, and we will have more conversations with you about a variety of topics, because you obviously have a unique vantage point that I think needs to be shared with a wide range of people. So I appreciate it. Thank you for your time,
Thank you.
and we'll talk really soon.
Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye.